Very exciting, yes. Welcome, folks who are joining. We'll get started in just a minute. We'll let everybody trickle in. Very excited for our session today.
Where is your background?
So this is actually Balboa Park. This is the Botanical Garden building. It doesn't look like this right now, but this is one of the views from the BPOC offices. Nick,
It
you look like
actually
you want to add to
half of it looks like that now.
that.
So
The
you
other
use
half is just
AI to do an alternate reality, compressing that vision with the current one.
They've been doing some restoration work for almost 2 years now, or about 2 years, I think.
close to 2 years. Yeah, it should be done in, I think, the end of the summer. It's looking amazing.
You'll have to send me a photo, Nick, since I'm no longer West Coast.
Okay.
So.
I'll take a picture in the middle of the eclipse of it.
Ooh, yes. I know, I'm loving the
Yeah.
energy today. My kid originally wasn't supposed to be out of school, but they decided this was so momentous that we've got all of our glasses ready, and it's hitting Missouri in an 99.2% full.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, something quite on the high ratio.
Yeah, I sent my son to school with some solar eclipse glasses, so hopefully he wears them. All right. So we have a really great crowd here. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Alex Cron, and I am BPOC's Digital Operations and Collections Information Analyst. And here with me today is Nick Honeysett, BPOC's CEO, as my co-host. For those who are joining us for the first time, BPOC is a nonprofit digital strategy and strategic planning consultancy based in San Diego, California, although I am located in Virginia. We have been hosting free technology webinars since late 2020 to facilitate discussions around the technologies we use in museums, libraries, archives, and galleries. You can check out the recordings from our previous webinars on our YouTube channel and learn more about BPOC on our website. Before we get started, I want to mention that we have Zoom captioning available and the Otter.ai transcription service in the upper left-hand corner if you need transcription assistance. Please put any questions that you have in the Q&A section. Please feel free to contribute to the conversation in the chat. We'll have time for Q&A at the end. Last, we are conducting a survey on AI usage in the cultural heritage field. I'm going to go ahead and put the link to that survey in the chat. And I will also share it again when we promote the webinar recording. The survey results and what is discussed during our webinars will be anonymized and summarized in a report published to the public on BPOC's website and social media channels towards probably later this year as we get ready to wrap up the webinar series. In addition to the survey, we are working on building a shared document for AI resources, including guidance, educational resources, learning opportunities, links shared by our guest speakers on the webinar series. This is a living document that will be updated as we continue the Dreaming of AI series. So I'm going to go ahead and put those links in the chat real quick. Now, for what we are all here for today, we have Dr. Piper Hutson, distinguished in neurodiversity, art history, and education, blending these disciplines to promote inclusivity in art and urban spaces. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Piper for her presentation.
Thank you so much, Alex. My name is Piper Hutson. I am a cisgender female, she, her, and I am currently at home in one of our offices with lots of maximalist historic ephemera behind me. I have red hair and an attempt of a 1940s hairstyle that did not go the way I wanted today. And I am so incredibly thrilled to be here because I learned about BPOC watching the webinars on AI integration in the Monk Museum completely excited me on the way of chromo digital preservation. And the more I have attended, the more I've met fascinating people who really have a passion for the outskirts of inclusivity that we're discussing here today. So I'm very grateful to share the research that myself and my writing partner, Dr. James Hutson, have been supported through Lindenwood University. And that is going to be discussing different sensory profiles, how it plays into neurodiversity, and how AI is a unique avenue for kind of using all of these needs and spaces, lack of funding, lack of resources that can help cultural heritage sites really expand their views. Woo. So neurodiversity and exhibition design, how on earth do those collaborate together? Well, if you have been aware of the idea of neurodivergency and neurodiversity, I became aware of that over in the UK, where they believe that the human brain has adapted to different situations over time, and therefore we all have differences. So neurodiversity is the understanding that we have differences, not deficits, and that the way we perceive the world is completely different to each individual. So we really need to open our ideas about what it takes to be inclusive if we're considering not only the standard DE&I, but also we're including cognitive inclusion. So those who have neurodivergent conditions, this can run the gamut and often have many interlapping inclusions. And that can be ADHD, autism, traumatic brain injury, PTSD, nerve damage, stroke, and lately I've been very interested in the overlap of how long COVID has many of the same similarities as some of these nuances. And thanks to Alex, we've had conversations very much akin to the unique way community can expand just by discussing their brain, discussing the things that might be hard. And that's really where we're going to push these boundaries of inclusion in these spaces that need them. So if we want to make people feel included and safe and comfortable, we really have to consider their brains and their experiences and their neurology in these spaces. How do we do this? Oh, neuroarts. Neuroarts is something that gets me oh so excited. There are these wonderful groups that are understanding that we have an overlap of science and that our brains and our bodies physiologically change when looking at art. And from that, we see that neuroaesthetics can be the use of this knowledge to actually amplify the art viewing experience, taking in consideration different neurotypes. So how do we make people feel comfortable when they are usually overstimulated or understimulated? Well, it's going to take a personalized approach, and it's going to start with looking at behaviors and our brains and reconsidering what we traditionally thought as well-being and creating well-being spaces. Many examples are occurring that overlap sensory inclusion. It's not just kids that enjoy touching an experience. This is one of those things that completely overlaps from ages to temporary, what we consider to be disability. The processing disorders of our sensory stimuli is different from everyone. Those who are neurodivergent often have a mass amount of stimuli that leads to their brain getting overabundance. And we look at this mostly in America in the consideration of kids, but really kids grow up. And so it's not surprising that we're discovering that the same needs to regulate our nervous systems, to feel comfortable in an environment, is what we sought as children. And this is utilized in these neuroarts exhibits, which are considering tactile, immersive experiences, considering our smells, considering how we hear, using music therapy. And these all play into the great benefits of neuroplasticity, that our brains learn and our brains grow even after trauma, even after brain injury. So we understand that there's now this great potential to use that connection in art to help people heal. But the only way that can be done is if their environments are going to be comfortable enough that they can feel in those areas. And AI, pretty scary term for a lot of people. AI is allowing the busy work to be reduced, but AI cannot create cognitive experiences. It cannot truly understand the human experience. Originally, I thought it would be fun to have a mimicry of the Blade Runner look to the day, because we're talking about this new immersion of what is humanity integrated in culture if it's being overcome by technology. And I like to think of technology as more of a tool than a affront to our future. And there are some amazing interactive AIs that are helping kind of allow these experiences. And NeuroArts is taking all of these little pieces together, allowing a more inclusive, one-on-one personalized interaction. Here we see someone who is engaging what we consider biophilic integration. And we've known for a while that being out in nature, seeing plants, having things that help us breathe better are going to create a sense of calm, which leads to a parasympathetic nervous system relaxed state. So this ability to make us feel spaces to appear more realistic, more interactive and empathetically engaging with us is how technology can expand that ability to hack into our own brains and bodies. So using AI is the ability to adapt what we know in museum spaces based off of pre-existing knowledge. And we know that a large amount of our modern society is dealing with trauma, and trauma is embedded in our bodies. It's not just something that we have occurring in our brain. It physiologically changes us through cortisol and stress triggers. And for those who are neurodivergent, it is often a very common overlapping condition due to the fact that overmassing sensory stimulation in environments that are over bright, over noisy, eventually cause the body and the brain to become fearful of similar situations. So post-traumatic stress not only involves what we consider often the veteran populace, it is going to also expand into individuals who are going to have emotional, sensory issues that also need to be considered. So here we have that overlapping where an exhibit that takes into account the sounds, the smells, and the intensity of the sensory environment helps multiple populations. Individuals that have sensory processing delays, disorders, memory issues can feel immensely calmer, being more aware of the surroundings and the environment they're walking in. This is something that, as my writing partner who heads up the Digital AI Immersion and Innovation Center at Lindenwood, discovered we can take technology and use it to help people feel ready to go into the world. So for a site that is concerned about someone not visiting due to a risk of too much sensory information or changes in the environment, having an understanding of the space based off a sensory map, which we'll get to, will help this. Our nervous systems, everything that we take in affects our body. And if we are overwhelmed by that sensory amount, it can put us into flight or fight situation. There's also fawn and other additional ones, which I know Alex and I have talked about. Right now, a lot of the majority of the academic research plays pretty strongly on how significant fight or flight is when it comes to trying to get individuals into your space. So all of these can be affected by the amount of smells, the type of smells, the sounds, and the touch. My background is in 19th century British art, so I've been very fortunate to study abroad, and it shocked me how these considerations were just an embedded part of the culture experiences, yet completely lacking in America. So the things that I noticed that helped not only my sensory anxiety, but I have a son who is rather agoraphobic, and unless he knows every detail of an institution, we're not going there, is this overabundance of information. They would create not only wayfinding once you were in the site, which is one way that we are slowly increasing the ways not only anxiety individuals, but also those with low sight vision also have an improved way of existing in an area through wayfinding. It's not just signs anymore. It's not just hoping someone will see a colored notation. It means we give them ways with a AR arrow, or we give a pullout on their map, which tells them where they are, or a geolocator that sends a sonic pulsar of a location to an individual who's blind and can only navigate a space through geo-navigation markers. All of these would be considered wayfinding. All of these are ways different individuals can feel more comfortable being guided through spaces. It's also a way that you can cater to sensory profiles. If someone is a sensory seeker or a sensory avoidant, there are institutions abroad which have two separate pathways to allow someone to individualize their space experience based off their needs. As an individual who has multiple overlapping neurodivergencies, I find breathing difficult, just breathing. So for individuals who feel chaotic in these spaces, they have a tendency not to take care of themselves, such as getting water or breath points. So incorporating sensory spots or no sensory spots, such as calming rooms or sensory areas that allow for those who are overstimulated to feel back in their body and not overwhelmed in the space, is a way that museums can truly create a supportive and empathetic understanding of these experiences. AI can be used for just about anything as long as it's guided properly. Here are some examples of ways that museums are using AI through chatbots, which are personalized communications for visitors who speak to an institution before going there to ask the questions they might be concerned about. This is everything from where will the bathrooms be? For those who are relegated to the disability community, this is such things as, is there going to be wheelchair access? Is there going to be automatic doors? How far is it from a curb? How high are the curbs? Are there going to be adult-sized changing tables anywhere on site for those who need that? So a lot of individuals who are not risking the anxiety and stress to come to a particular place, this can be so greatly alleviated by letting them know that their needs are going to be met prior to being on site. So the AI is able to answer these questions. It's able to personalize the interactions for what might be their particular style. It's also able to tell them when is the most trafficked time, if they prefer to come from a lower socialized, crowded scene. And this can all be in real time, depending on what sort of operating system the individual and the place is using. Now, mobile app is great, but not everyone, especially small local museums, can utilize this great technology. So one way that is what we believe a quick step into that is partnerships with educational institutes for wayfinding. This means easy access to a group that is working on understanding the next generation of graphic design and technological integration who'd be hungry to learn about the needs of a local institution. This means also working for digital twin access. Many institutions are understanding the importance of 360 imaging or creating a digital twin. I walked into the interest knowing that the university here was doing digital twins of places at risk over abroad. So such as scanning churches that are at risk for falling down, or working to digitally scan things that are potentially in a war zone area. So while I learned about it in the preservation sense, the understanding of how these digital twins could operate to help visitors become more comfortable seemed like an easy overlap for both institutions, universities, and community collaborative projects. This is an example of a sensory map from the Museum of London. It's one of the easiest ways to begin this transition of neuroinclusion, where a map, which is likely pre-existing in your computer files, and then added where light transitions might be in a bright or abrupt situation, places that could be nooks or sensory breaks, areas that could be too noisy near cafes, could be olfactory overstimulation, places that you might be able to experience something over sensory stimulation if you're looking for that particular. So these are easy printout online, however you'd like to do them. I have also seen tactile versions of this. So a Braille computer has gone over them and they can be handed out to an individual, which not only is a souvenir of an institution, it also is creating those multiple overlapped layers of being comfortable to ask for your needs in a place that may not traditionally have them available. Another idea, other than noticing all of these transitionary sensories, is the concept of historical soundscape elements. A place is more than just what you can see. It is the animals that are around it. It is the flora and fauna. It is the brush of the things that come up to the door. It is the smells, if it is a white recently painted. And to truly understand a place is that opportunity to create historical smell or soundscapes. And AI is able to do that. If you give it the option to record data about the types of trees, sounds, and all that, it can become a personalized way to engage with the sounds you're familiar with or acquaint you before visiting that place. Then all of the studies that have been done have geared this type of research specifically to younger populace. As I mentioned earlier, one of the absolute joys of my life is meeting other individuals who have my neurotype and discovering the frustration of finding museums as a safe space, yet still being triggered by them. And so expanding the sensory kits, which I hope I have on, to not be biased just to children, not be biased to creating times that are only for that specific group or only for an age group, but remembering that the vast amount of ages and cultures and heritages and backgrounds also play into this is a great way to just start feeling inclusive for a larger populace than just children along the spectrum. Neuroplasticity. As I mentioned, the brain is amazing and frustrating, and that the more repeated experiences you have, the more tied it is to that pathway. Now, if we create new experiences bit by bit in a slow progression, such as visiting a place through a digital mock-up on their website or walking through a VR space of that institution, our brain is going to register that. And if we continue to do that or continue to go to this place after viewing it, our brain will take the neural pathways and link them together. This will make a familiarization that makes it not so scary walking into the actual space. So this is more than just knowing where the bathrooms are or knowing if there's going to be food. Physiologically, we can help people be more comforted by repeatedly giving them more access. So museums are aware that we need more people in them. We need to be more inclusive. We need to consider things far outside of what has been done. And I think the exciting thing about these kinds of conversations is including neurological considerations. When Microsoft launched their cognitive inclusion toolkit, the neurodiversity bubble just exploded. And what I see a bit frustrating is that continuation of limiting the exposure to certain hours or certain communities when there is nothing better than being validated as you are. Just recently, and I'm sorry, I'll have to come back to the name of the museum, they decided that they would have sensory low hours on a day and not make it a certain hour or certain time frame. And that way, everyone who came would just know that that was that amount. And the reduced amount of stigma for a neurodivergent parent to know not only will they be invited in the space, but that space is for them, and anyone who comes is accepting them in that space, is a far greater gift than an hour where you're allowed to have some free toys to make your child feel better. Parents are, again, just children who grow up wishing that they knew why they were frustrated in these situations. So we have these amazing AI, digital mapping, virtual twins, accessible environments. This helps the neurodivergent populace and the accessibility parameters expand. Having these opportunities outside of physically requiring someone to come to your space allows the help for the gaps in transportation, in physical capacity to actually get to a space, financial ability, location, so many other components that might be creating a barrier that allows someone to truly feel a sense of community. So our recommendations, we were very grateful that several institutions in the UK and abroad were willing to tell us all about their processes. We have a book called Inclusive Smart Museums that talks about every example we could find of people who are kind of pushing the envelope and how we could work more towards amplifying these projects. The use of sensory maps is something I'm really excited to see people doing. The application not only for seeing, having, enjoying, and then continuing by having a social media where you share your own sensory maps. Everyone's different, but there's the opportunity to share that difference by having a community outside of the physical space. And this allows opportunities for multiple experiences. So I typically do talk fast. That's part of my brain neurotype. So apologies if I went too quickly. I'm thrilled that we have captions. Live captions are something multiple populaces are grateful for. When you have this opportunity or an opportunity to share in a museum, having live captions gives those with ADHD or memory issues the ability to follow along, even if they aren't low hearing or of the deaf community. So accessibility is so abundant right now. It is great when we realize there are multiple connection routes to make it happen.
Thank you so much, Piper. I swear, every time I have a conversation with you in this presentation, I feel seen, I feel heard coming away from it. So I just want to start off before we jump into Q&A. Thank you so much for all of that. It's greatly appreciated. And captions, I've been using those for years, inside and outside of work, and they are life-changing.
And if anyone, I know that's one thing that's difficult for museums is not having the access to ChatGPT, auto captioning. And so someone gratefully sent me a direct email on LinkedIn asking, all right, I know how important captions is, but how do I do it here, here, and here? So if you have questions on captions, I just recently was able to find the direct routes for adding captions in all social platforms. So more than happy to assist if that is one of the barriers causing an institution to have trouble with captions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Piper. We did get a question about whether or not the slides would be available to share. So I just wanted to make sure that we touched on that.
Yep, you're more than welcome to share them out.
Excellent. Thank you. So we did get a question in the Q&A before I dive into the list that I received from our registrations. So this individual asked if you have any thoughts or resources on code-designed maps in museums and galleries for people with developmental disabilities.
So it's really interesting to see how, and it's only through collaborations, because typically museums do not have the technological framework to get that up and running. So I've seen multiple different avenues that have made it happen. My personal favorite, being an academic, is working with a local university to tap into their tech knowledge. They're not only going to have tech support to help you with the process, they're going to be able to back the ways to get it and to keep it strong. So if you can get a local university to go with you, that's great. Some other ones have been given open code access to show how they are assisting in inputting these sensory maps. We recently tried to apply for a grant to use bio-tracking sensors to check when individuals were getting overheated or overstimulated and weren't able to recognize it. So this was a conversation with a local zoo where we took our personal experience of the several points where we never made it past there as parents and realized that if you could track a visitor's experience, you could understand better through their physical needs how to gamify and say, get 5 points for drinking water at that uphill, or remember to take a breather next to the meditation route. So when they have been kind of using the code for maps, they've been conscious to add inclusive measures at the very forefront in the map to help people with their own self-awareness in the location. And those are my favorite projects. I'm not a tech coder, so I can't give breakdown on how they're doing that, but I'm more than happy to share the case studies are doing some really interesting things.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Sorry, someone was just asking for your contact information, so I pasted your email in the chat for those who are looking for it.
And LinkedIn, LinkedIn's the easiest. Oh, another one that just came to mind, the Lincoln Museum was able to get permission to read people physiologically enough to recognize their emotional state, to test how sentimentally attached they were to certain exhibits by the way they registered through the biometric scanning done through the exhibit. So people are also using it in adult scenarios to the way that they are experiencing an emotional reaction to an exhibit.
That's fantastic. Oh, we got questions coming in now. So our next question is, what are the case study names?
Oof. Do I have that? I don't know if I let's add it to the list of things to share, because I don't know if I have the exact case studies doing those on this. This was more of a general overview and not my deep dive exciting.
To answer this individual's question, we will include those when we upload the video to YouTube. So please keep an eye out for that. I will promote the webinar recording probably tomorrow. So just keep an eye out for that. So our next question is, are there any Canadian universities that would be good to partner with?
Ooh. I'm asking ChatGPT. Any Canadian partner?
You're muted, Nick.
As in life.
I was very excited. We did a project with Alberta where they had us meet in Horizon workrooms to discover if the minimized sensory experience being in a contained virtual world would cause less social anxiety than in a regular meeting. And I was very excited to personally find that I could stim or dance and no one would know as an avatar, which was a very freeing experience that led us to do the projection of avatars as social interaction for certain subgroups that are not able to interact in a more personalized experience.
That's fantastic.
Oh, several. University of Toronto has a Department of Computer Science and Geographical Information Systems. Oh, you're gonna have to reach out to me if that works out. University of British Columbia has a software development and a GIS group, so they'd probably be up to it. And the last one's gonna be University of Waterloo because they have a renowned computer science and geomatics. Not sure what that is, but I'd love you to tell me.
So I kind of have a related question to this, Piper, as well, as far as getting in touch with universities. I mean, a question of how, who do you try and get in touch with? Because I feel like that in of itself can be a barrier sometimes.
Very true. So generally, the more local access you have, I would say stick to where you are and go on campus. I mean, there is as much as we are living in a world where digital access is great, you can't connect in the same way to a computer tech group. I'm thinking the innovation lab here, they are advertised. So I would imagine understanding your local universities and seeing if any of them are currently pursuing projects along this route. AI is a big program marker. Schools are desperately trying to teach up. We were fortunate that we integrated all online 4 years ago. So it was something we were able to play with very quickly. Some institutions are doing AI integrations, and those are the ones that seem to also have the digital technology to kind of be considering AR and VR experiences. So a good Google search to see if any are focusing on that, and then seeing if they have a lab or a hub or a community contact. All universities have community relations people, and it's just finding those. I no plug for LinkedIn, but oftentimes the only way I get to find where I'd like to be in an institution is to search through social media and say, would you be interested in talking about geomapping?
It's how we connected.
It's how we connected. I loved your webinars. Are you doing this? No, let's talk. Yes. So the personalized messages is one of the best ways to kind of make that avenue work.
Excellent. All right, so we have our next question. Would you be able to speak a bit more about the argument for not having special sensory friendly hours outside of our regular hours? I've tried making this argument to my director, and he's really stuck on doing it before the museum is open to the public.
It's exclusionary.
That is deeply insulting, I think, to that community. I mean, I have a broader question that I think this speaks to, which is how do we get this in to be the norm rather than the exception?
Yes.
That's a great question. I would love to, I mean, you're asking, how do you bridge the brain and body disconnect that is the American societal expectation? So I think if we solve that, every brain is different, and telling people that they're only going to be included if they come to your location at 9 to 10. I guess the only way I can reframe that is if you really wanted to go to a movie, but you're too old to see that movie and you can only see it with other old people at, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. How'd that make you feel?
Right. That's the equivalent, right? I mean,
Yeah,
you would think with all the initiatives for DEAI now that this would be at the top, well, very high up on the list to provide that support. As you were going through all that sensory stuff, Piper, I had a question about, so when I think about interpretation and the level of the interpreted content, there are studies that say that even adults like content that is pitched, maybe at 10th grade or something like that. So it made me wonder if you're kind of dulling things down so that people don't get sensory overload. Do most people like that? I mean, would most people prefer not to have this dark, fluorescent lit galleries and have something a little more confusing?
Yes, thank you, because that leads me into something that I should have discussed. And it perfectly shows we all have different learning styles and we all adapt differently. I became a deep love of 19th century British art, but found that the Americanized giant text panel of white on black was too much for me always. So I would always take pictures of it for when I was ready to come back, because I couldn't do it there in the bright lights, white walls, white label, black. It was too much for me. And I recognized that the way that institutions were kind of accommodating for that was only towards children in science museums, at least in the United States. But when you go to other countries, there would be no real designation of this is meant for adults, this is meant for kids. It would be more of a overall. And to the question of dumbing down, that's why QR codes are such a beautiful example of considering multiple learning styles. Some people, I haven't met those people that love giant, overabundant labels. They must exist, or they could just perpetuate the original established patriarchal idea of information being just enough to make people feel that they don't know all of it and are being told it instead of experiencing it. Versus other exhibits are now considering well, if this person would like these dresses, why wouldn't they want a sample of these textiles to feel? My impulsivity gets me in trouble in museums where there are no tactiles, especially fashion ones, because I want to hear the sounds. I want to be able to feel how that velvet is thicker and would be heavier to wear. There's so many different experiences we're missing out on because we are only thinking that we need to view things in a visual way. Visual's great, but most of our brains are getting things from the sounds and the smells, the reflections, the cast shadows, all these things we're not considering. So if we view tactile, we're going to allow for maps. I absolutely love the Missouri History Museum has an entire cabinet of tactile maps that go geographically with the exhibit. So for me, who a giant map on the wall is not going to interact enough with my brain to engage my prefrontal to care about the material, if you get my hands moving through the different dips in the valley and recognizing that there's no water or feeling the trees, I'm going to empathize humanity-wise so much differently with the culture I'm viewing than giving a label about where they conglomerated. So there's no reason not to expand every avenue of integration in a museum to allow an individual to choose. They can just have the label. If they want more, they can QR code it. They can just look at it, or they can feel the tactiles in around unused space. There's a lot of unused space in modern art exhibitions that could be engaging us more.
Certainly. And I would also recommend kind of touching back on this question that we had from anonymous attendee, visitor evaluations. You know, talking to your audiences, your community, and getting their feedback and sharing that with your director, because I mean, that's your community that you are, you know, servicing, that you are serving. Yeah.
The community is going to know where your gaps are. So if you are assuming you have gaps without actually asking what would benefit in this area, that's another thing AI can do. If you have maps of time frames that people are in the exhibits, you can track which is working and which isn't. If you go one step further with working with the science department to track eye tracking, you can actually see what are people interacting with, or what are they just skimming over. And this can help you reframe what you want to amplify in an exhibit based off of the actual data of your visitors' interests.
Yes, 100% data is going to support your arguments.
And AI is great about going through the collections and also letting you know what isn't in your collections and what could be amplified based off of gaps you might not be aware of yourself at the time being.
Yes, absolutely. All right, so we are getting lots of questions. So next one, on that note of the biometric scanning, in particular for those with developmental disabilities who may be nonverbal, I'm wondering what the ethics approval looks like for a project like that.
I mean, are they asking for someone who's under 18? Because if they're over 18 and that individual brings themselves to their institution, they can speak for themselves. So I'm not sure. Nonverbal as in, can you repeat it?
So they're asking on that note of the biometric scanning, in particular for those with developmental disabilities who may be nonverbal. I'm wondering what the ethics approval looks like for a project like that. Maybe best practices?
That's a great question. I would love, Alex, we got to write this down, because now I'm wondering, typically for nonverbal communication in an institution, they can give you a guide map or you write something down. I haven't participated in the biometric studies myself. Those were, I believe, 2 different universities on the East Coast, but again, we'll have to look into that. If there's a visualization that can translate that recording biometrics, that's a tricky question. I don't know.
I can share Piper's email in the chat again in case you want to follow up with her after the webinar, just for, you know, a side conversation.
Some institutions have verbal communication books as an accessibility tool at the visitor center, but I would love to know if anyone is modernizing the things people need to ask.
Good question.
Yeah.
Okay, so have any of the it's another biometric one. So have any of the museums using some of these more data and biometric intensive methods run into problems with privacy issues? Are people told ahead of time of these programs so they can choose whether or not they want to participate?
In the studies I saw, everyone was required to sign a form before going into the exhibit and participating in it. I think that's usually the standard, is consent upon entry. I'm trying to see if it gives me any examples, because they would be the ones to ask since they've done it. And it does stand to say that it's different between museums here in America. We are much more about concern for our privacy and rights versus over in the UK. And I believe it might be due to the integrated medicine component to it, since everything is open share when it comes to the museums, because they're being funded by the government and it's all integrated. That's not as such a privacy concern, I think. So it could be something very vastly different between countries even. Trying to see if it pops out anything that would add to us. But yes, the issue of privacy is one of the big controls, because do you do fingerprinting? Are you allowed to do eye tracking? Is there any additional biometric data that could be pooled that you might not know about it with technology? Of course, privacy is a huge concern, especially when it comes to AI, where it pulls from, what's it's using, what's its rights. We're at that tricky point where these are questions that aren't fully being answered yet, because we are so new with the technology.
Well, that's why we have this webinar series.
Yes. If you know about, if anyone on here has done the biometric studies, we would love to know more. So please share.
And we would love to have you on the series.
Yes.
Okay, so next question. Do you have any experience with grants or fundings for or funding for these initiatives? They're Canadian, but they're still interested in the American processes.
I'm familiar with American grants, not as familiar with Canadian grant systems. I just looked up a whole bunch of different artist grants. I think at the moment there are more individualized artist grants than institutional grants doing it. Institutions are focused more on digital provenance for their finances right now, due to the hubbub in Britain. I haven't looked it up yet, but that'd be something I'd love to see.
This is an excellent point, though, and something that we can add to our resources spreadsheet for AI, part of the webinar series. So thank you, Kristen, for bringing up that question, because it gives us another thing to include on our resources spreadsheet. All right, so let's move on to the next. Where would be the best place or places to discover traveling sensory art installations that have been designed for sensory processing disorders? I would love to bring one into our galleries. And Piper, please let me know if I'm reading these too fast too.
Oh, no, not at all. There's a lot of unique projects. And again, I want to say, stay local. I'm currently local to Missouri, and the Missouri History Museum is my favorite because they have all these things integrated, and they were one of the first American institutions I saw doing this. And I was just like, oh, yay. And it's a trial and error process. Most of those that have it saw a need, received funding enough to house question and answers. I really enjoy the ones over in Japan had the finances to have an artist who specializes in that design pods that would work with music and sensory personalized sounds for their sensory rooms. Exhibits relating to that, I don't know, although ChatGPT did let us know when it comes to funding, there are no particular grants specifically aimed at sensory installations for museums. The likelihood of the National Endowment being open towards it for the mental health angle is likely the easiest way to get into the grant access, is to utilize mental health and the intersection of health and science as an option for funding.
That's great to know. Thank you for that, Piper. All right. So let's see. Especially in the US, tech companies who develop much of these technologies do not have a great track record of using people's data in ethical ways. Yeah.
Yep, true.
Used to enable addiction to platforms. Can museums use these AI technologies for all of these wonderful purposes without compromising, and another privacy question, compromising individual privacy? In existing examples that are in practice, how is the data of visitors kept safe?
Again, very good question, all on the privacy angles. I think it's institution and examples would have their own unique things. One of the issues I see come up a lot in AI and pulling all of data is how do you leak it? Some people are able to work with nonprofits enough to utilize their own language integration to have their AI information not pulled or not used. It's a separate funneling. They have their own ways of doing that. And if you're truly scared about privacy, you'd probably have to make sure you do not use open source and you do not use one that could conglomerate it. And there are people, especially within minority companies, who are discovering the fear of hidden information or information not being pulled and creating their own AI based off of their subcultures to limit that potential. So there are groups that are very concerned with that and doing enough to create their own learning management systems with these artificial intelligences and language processing methods outside of standard companies. But if you're a small local institution, again, you're kind of restrained with what tech you can do, what you have access with, what funding you can get. There's also very limited discussions on the hierarchy of cloud storage. That's, again, you have to have high working internet, you have to have techs who can do it, you have to have the ability for software updates, and these are all considerations that aren't always in the infrastructure to begin with that present problems.
And storing that data and making sure that it's safe from any kind of, hacks or
Yep.
anything like that. So
I've seen
encryption.
several
Mhm.
institutions who worked with for-profit companies to come in and do digital scannings or to do all this education material for the latest technology. And then that technology would die out and they had no way to recreate the activity or recreate everything they'd done because that was now dead technology. So
Mhm.
being aware of the fluctuating abilities for tech and saving it and uploading it are necessary to kind of stay alive in these activities.
Digital preservation is certainly a good key point to consider in that too as well.
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, so trying to get through all these questions because I know we got about 8 minutes left. Are there considerations taken for neurodivergent families whose English is not their native language?
Ooh,
Mm,
okay.
that's a good question.
Another great thing about AI is that we have the technologies where if there are materials on site, they can be either translated through an app or an easy access point that most institutions are doing are the ability for bilingual audio tours. Like being aware that there are technologies that have all of these capacities for languages and not limiting it. So some are doing it. If you are bilingual, that's another thing that's a great resource to know prior. Are they going to be walking into an institution that has these, that has an understanding of the bilingual nature of maybe, and with that, it's a whole separate conversation we've had of these unique groups who may need something different. I'm a Caucasian, white, female, middle class. I don't know if my neurodivergency would be supported in the same way that a Hispanic individual from who doesn't speak English as well would perceive colors. Colors are something so culturally ingrained. Even a conversation I saw yesterday is over in India for autism awareness. They did blue, but here blue is tied to a previous movement that many no longer consider acceptable for advocacy. So colors, the personalization, the need to understand that AI has the potential to be fed information. You have to be very careful with what you task it to say in an American society, what would be the most accessible way to present this data? or if I was trying to include more sensory experiences to this exhibit, then you enter what the exhibit is. AI will give you ideas that others have done that have worked or haven't worked. So it also helps you not reinvent the wheel to know what could be a gap and how you could solve it.
Certainly. And Beth in the chat actually makes a good point, and I know we've already touched on this, is, cautioning people to not rely on AI translation apps, and having, that human touch, just because AI is not perfect by
It's
any
a
means.
tool. Or as my husband said, it's a graduate assistant. So it's a
Yes.
graduate assistant, which means occasionally the source material is going to be wrong. There's going to be some edits, and you're going to have to look at it before you share it.
I love that comparison. It's a good one. All right, so in addition to QR codes, we found that printed gallery guides provide additional information in a conversational tone and serves as a museum visit memento. Okay, so that's from Anna. It's
Absolutely, Anna, love it. I also love people who understand that having multiple languages, multiple printed sizes, and one thing I'd love to add, different tactile material. Some people love the slick laminate, others find that affrontive to holding on to. Some have Braille maps, which is so exciting that nowadays you can print out not only Braille maps, but I do want to, some great, again, collaboration with the university, or if anyone has a 3D printer, if you did small replicas from a 3D printer, you are now allowing a touch experience that, again, benefits multiple populaces. So having physical objects from a map in multiple languages, the more the better. The more ways you can allow different learning styles to take in the material that you find important enough to share, the more that they will comprehend it.
Absolutely. All right, so just to try and get these last two questions in before we're out of time, what is considered best practices for incorporating neurodivergent narrative in our exhibitions?
Oh, that's a great question. I have seen 4 exhibitions that specifically were curated in regards to the neurodivergent voice, with artists, with their text panels. They've all been overseas. I know that there are some amazing, very small programs that are usually connected with health service programs or nursing facilities that are creating a more common narrative around the health. And that's usually where I see that overlap, is when there's some additional contribution there. It's not easy, and we're growing. I mean, 2 years ago, I could have Googled neurodivergent artists and nothing would have come up. And now I can do that and I can find out what's happening. So it is very fast. But even like I mentioned earlier, when it comes to AI and minorities, if there's not enough data to pull to make an existence, that can't present that narrative. If it's lacking that perspective, it's limited. And that's why AI cannot ever overcome humanity, because there's too much humanity to truly get it to understand. And so again, it's a tool that can help assist make the knowledge easier, but it still needs to be told how.
Absolutely. All right, so our last question, do you have recommendations for how to balance what might be competing accessibility needs? For example, some people might need brighter lights to see, and others might find too much light overstimulating.
Oh, yes. This journey started because I found a similar sensory profile in my son, who is completely different from our daughter, who's completely different from my husband. So going into an experience where every one of us needs something else seemed impossible. And I also immediately want to sympathize with those who are ADHD, which is autistic and ADHD, because your brain is therefore competing with the type of adrenaline, dopamine hit. And so it has the innate difficulty in one brain to want novelty and newness and still need expectations and anxiety reducing. And so right there, just that neurotype is going to need multiple ways. And depending on the day, If the brain's tired and isn't able to take in its usual information, it'll be different than what it needs the next day. So competing neurotype assistance is just that ability to know, having the knowledge that, all right, today I'm overstimulated. I don't want to go to a place that is extra bright. It helps a person recognize their own needs that can be easily ignored if it wasn't accommodated at all.
Yes, thank you for that. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Piper. This was fantastic, honestly. I've loved all of our sessions on our series, but this is my favorite.
Well, I
gotta
know
be
you
honest.
know, you get it. As a mom and as having the neurotype, just going to the zoo is not our parent experience at all.
100%. Yes.
you.
Thank you so much for sharing your work and your experiences with us. I'll be sure to share your slides and your contact information with anyone who asks for it, along with the webinar recording. We'll be back on May 2nd with Amy Adams from the National Museum of the Royal Navy to share a presentation on the museum's early foray and experience into applying AI technologies in their collections management practices. Please follow BPOC, Balboa Park Online Collaborative, to stay current on our activities and any announcements for future webinars. Don't forget to complete the survey. If you haven't already done so, we hope everyone has a wonderful week. Thank you so much for joining us today. Catch the clips if you can. You don't want to miss that.
Thank you for being here, everyone in the audience. Thank you for being here to learn a different perspective. So I greatly appreciate this opportunity. Always great
thank
to
you,
Alex.
everyone. Take care.
Excellent.